The morning sun had just touched the thatched roofs of Nabola village when Temba, a young herdsman, caught a strange scent in the air. It came softly at first, drifting with the wind that blew across the fields. It was not the smoke from cooking fires, nor the sweetness of morning dew, nor the smell of the goats grazing near the river. This smell was different, deep, sharp, earthy and old, like something buried under the ground for a long time. It wrapped around him, then faded away, leaving a question hanging in his mind. Temba stood still, holding his walking stick, and sniffed the air again. The wind blew from the west, from the side of the forest. He turned his head slowly and looked toward the tall trees that marked the edge of Nabola. The forest stood silent, its green leaves shimmering under the rising sun. From where he stood, it looked peaceful, but Temba knew the stories. The elders always said the forest kept its secrets close. He tried to forget the smell and went back to watching his goats. They were chewing lazily on the grass, their small bells clinking softly. But even as he watched them, the scent came again, stronger this time, heavy and strange, as if it carried the breath of something ancient. Temba frowned. He had lived in Nabola all his life, and he had smelled many things: rain-soaked earth, new grain, wildflowers, and even the bitter smoke when wood burned wet. But this smell was not like any of those. It felt alive, as if it wanted him to notice. "Strange," he muttered under his breath. Down by the huts, smoke rose from the cooking fires. Women were already grinding millet and singing softly to the rhythm of their pestles. A few boys ran past, chasing a rolling hoop. Old men sat near the fire pit, their canes lying beside them as they talked in low voices about the night's dreams. Temba heard one of them say, "The wind speaks when the spirits wish to be heard." He smiled to himself. The old men liked to say such things. He had grown up hearing their tales, about talking winds, rivers that remembered names, and drums that called the dead. He did not believe those stories, not really. The world, he thought, was simple. You plant, you herd, you sleep, you wake. Spirits belonged in stories told to children under moonlight. But as the day brightened and the sun climbed higher, the scent did not fade. Instead, it seemed to follow him. When he led the goats down to drink at the river, it lingered in the air. When he sat under the acacia tree to eat his roasted maize, he caught it again, faint but still there. Even when the wind changed direction, the smell seemed to move with him. By noon, it had become too strange to ignore. He walked back toward the village, his goats following lazily behind. As he passed near the market, a few women looked up from their baskets of cassava leaves and frowned. One of them, a young woman named Ebony, wrinkled her nose. "Temba," she called out, "do you smell that?" He stopped and nodded. "I do." "Since morning." She shook her head. "It's not right. It smells like the earth after fire, but there's no fire near here." An older woman beside her crossed her arms. "When the wind carries a strange smell, it means something is coming. My grandmother told me so." The words made a small chill crawl up Temba's neck. He laughed quickly to hide it. "Maybe someone left food to burn," he said, forcing a smile. But as he walked away, the laughter died in his throat. The scent grew thicker again, as though mocking his disbelief. At home, his grandmother, Mama Lani, sat outside her hut, her gray hair wrapped in a cloth the color of river clay. She was peeling cassava and humming a tune that sounded older than the hills. When she saw Temba, she looked up and smiled. "You look troubled, my son," she said. "What chases you today?" Temba sat down beside her. "It's a smell, grandmother," he said. "It came with the wind this morning. It's everywhere now." Mama Lani stopped peeling and stared toward the forest. Her eyes grew narrow and thoughtful. "What kind of smell?" "I don't know," Temba said. "Like smoke, but not from fire. Like wet soil, but sharper. It feels old." Her hands trembled slightly as she put down the cassava. "Old smells are not just smells," she murmured. "They are memories. Sometimes the earth remembers before we do." Temba frowned. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her voice soft and slow. "There was a time, long before you were born, when the people of Nabola buried something sacred in those woods. A drum carved by the first chief himself. They say the drum was lost after a great storm. Since then, when the air grows heavy with that strange scent, it means the ancestors are stirring." Temba stared at her. A drum? Why would a drum make such a smell? She smiled faintly. Not the drum, my son. What sleeps with it? The wind blew just then, and the scent swept through the yard again, thick and bold. Mama Lonnie's eyes filled with worry. She made a small mark on the ground with her finger, a symbol Temba had seen her draw only when she prayed. "Do not go near the forest," she said firmly. "Promise me, Temba." He wanted to promise, but curiosity prickled at him like thorns. "It's only a smell, grandmother," he said gently. She shook her head. "The wind never carries, only anything. You must listen when it speaks." Temba smiled to calm her, but his thoughts were restless. After a while, he stood and led his goats back toward the grazing fields. The scent followed him like a shadow. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather above the hills. The sky darkened, and the wind turned cool. The goats bleated uneasily. Temba sat on a rock and watched the forest sway in the distance. He thought of his grandmother's words, of the buried drum, and of the strange smell that refused to leave him alone. When the first drops of rain began to fall, he rose to guide his goats home. The path was slick, and the scent seemed to grow stronger with the rain. He looked once more toward the forest, where the mist was rising from the trees like smoke. For a moment, he thought he heard a faint sound, a dull rhythmic thump, like a drum being beaten far away. He froze. The goats stopped too, their ears twitching. The sound came again, faint but clear, then vanished into the wind. Temba's heart began to pound. He shook his head and forced himself to move. "It's only thunder," he said aloud, though there was no lightning yet. When he reached the village, people were closing their doors against the rain. The air was full of that smell now, heavy and thick. Even the old men at the fireside had stopped talking. One of them looked toward the forest and whispered, "The wind carries news again." Temba stood at the edge of the village and stared at the dark trees. He wanted to believe it was just the rain, just the forest breathing after a long dry season. But deep inside, he felt something else, a pull, quiet but steady, like the rhythm of that distant drum calling his name. He turned away and led the goats into their pen. The smell clung to his clothes, to his hair, even to his skin. When he lay down to sleep that night, it was still there, whispering in the dark, old and patient. And though he told himself he would forget it by morning, he knew he would not. If only he knew where the smell had come from. By midday, the strange smell had reached every corner of Nabala. It floated through the air like smoke that refused to fade. Women at the well whispered that it was a bad omen. Some said it was the scent of the earth after spirits had walked. Others said it was the warning of a storm or sickness. Children stopped playing and covered their noses, running indoors with wide eyes. The goats bleated restlessly, and even the birds that usually sang in the trees seemed to have gone quiet. The whole village felt uneasy, as if the air itself carried a secret that no one wanted to know. Temba noticed it everywhere. When he walked past the marketplace, he could smell it even through the spices and roasted yams. When he went to the river, it seemed to cling to the water like oil. He washed his hands, but the smell stayed, as if it had settled inside his skin. He looked around to see if others noticed it too. The blacksmith stopped hammering his iron and lifted his head. The potter, whose hands were covered in clay, sniffed the air and frowned. Everyone could smell it, and no one could explain it. When Temba reached home, his grandmother, Mama Lonnie, sat in the shade of the mango tree. She looked worried. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were still bright and sharp. She had a small bowl of herbs beside her, but she was not mixing them as she usually did. She was staring at the forest beyond the hills. "Child, come here," she said softly. Temba walked closer. "Yes, grandmother." She looked at him for a moment before speaking again. "Do not follow that smell," she said. "It comes from the place where the drums once cried." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Temba frowned, confused. "The drums? You mean the old stories?" Mama Lonnie nodded slowly. "Yes. Long ago, before the river changed its path, the drums of Nabala spoke to the spirits. They were played only by the chiefs and the elders during times of great trouble. But one night, the drums cried so loud that even the animals fled. When morning came, the drummers were gone, and the hills were silent. Since that day, no one has gone there. The smell you speak of, it comes when the hills remember. Temba tried to laugh, but it came out weakly. Grandmother, they are only stories. Maybe the smell is just from dead leaves or from the rains coming. Mama Lani shook her head. The earth remembers things we forget. You are young, but you must listen. If you follow that smell, it will follow you back. Temba wanted to argue, but something in her tone made him stay quiet. He nodded, though his heart was restless. Curiosity burned inside him like a hidden fire. That afternoon, he helped his grandmother fetch water and feed the goats, but his thoughts kept wandering. The smell seemed stronger near the edge of the village. Each time the wind shifted, it came to him again, sharp and heavy, almost like the scent of smoke after rain. He found himself staring toward the dark hills beyond the trees. The elders called them the Forbidden Hills. No one went there after sunset. Some said strange lights could be seen at night. Others said voices whispered through the rocks when the moon was full. When night came, the air grew still. The sky was clear, and the moon rose, large and white, lighting up the roofs and paths of Nabala. Most of the villagers had gone indoors, but Temba could not sleep. He lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling. The smell still lingered, faint but steady, as if it were waiting for him. He turned on his side and closed his eyes, but the thought of it only grew stronger. He felt as though the smell was calling him, whispering from far away, asking to be followed. Finally, he sat up. The night was silent except for the sound of crickets. He could hear his grandmother's soft breathing from her hut nearby. He knew she would be angry if she found out what he was thinking, but the feeling inside him was too strong to ignore. He reached for his walking stick and quietly stepped outside. The moonlight painted the village silver. The path toward the hills was narrow, bordered by tall grass that swayed gently. The goats were asleep, and the air was cool. As Temba walked, the smell grew stronger again, guiding him like an invisible thread. He could almost feel it pulling him forward. When he passed the last hut, he stopped and looked back. The village was peaceful, glowing faintly under the moon. He thought of Mama Lani's words and hesitated. For a moment, he almost turned back. But then the wind shifted, carrying the scent right to him, deep, strange, and old. It filled his chest, and something inside him stirred. He tightened his grip on his stick and kept walking. The hills rose ahead of him, dark shapes against the bright sky. The path became rough, covered with stones and roots. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly. Every now and then, he thought he heard whispers, maybe the wind, maybe something else. The smell thickened, almost too strong to bear. It was no longer just earthy, it was sweet and smoky, like something burning far away. He stopped beside a tree to catch his breath. The forest looked alive under the moonlight. Shadows moved, and the leaves rustled though there was no wind. He thought he saw a flicker of light among the trees, a faint glow that vanished as soon as he blinked. His heart pounded, but he kept walking. After some time, he reached the foot of the hills. The ground here was dry, cracked like the skin of old clay pots. The smell was strongest here. It wrapped around him completely, heavy and strange. The air felt thick, and even the insects had gone quiet. He took another step and heard a crunch beneath his foot. He looked down and saw pieces of old wood, carved, broken, blackened by age. He bent to pick one up. It was smooth and curved, like part of a drum. He stared at it, his mouth dry. Mama Lani's words came back to him. It comes from the place where the drums once cried. He looked around. The land was covered in weeds and stones, but now that his eyes had adjusted, he could see shapes, small mounds, half-buried, almost like graves. The smell rose stronger, almost choking him. He felt dizzy, but also drawn closer. He walked a few more steps, his heart racing. The moonlight made everything shine faintly, the stones, the leaves, even the old wood at his feet. Somewhere ahead, he thought he heard a soft sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a slow, steady rhythm, like someone beating a drum far away, faint but clear. Temba froze. His fingers tightened around his stick. The sound came again, thump, 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 and then stopped. The air went still. He looked back toward the village. It was too far now, hidden by the trees. He was alone. The smell surrounded him, thick as smoke. For a moment, he thought he saw movement near one of the mounds, just a shadow, bending and rising again. Fear crawled up his back, but the pull of curiosity was stronger. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. The ground felt soft, almost breathing under his feet. The rhythm came again, very faint, as if under the soil itself. He knelt and placed his hand on the ground. The earth was warm. The smell filled his lungs, deep and ancient. His heart beat fast, matching the rhythm. He whispered, "Who's there?" No one answered. The wind brushed past him, and the smell faded just a little. He looked at the cracked ground and the broken wood and felt something stir in his chest. Not fear this time, but a strange sadness, as if the hills were remembering a story he could not hear. The forest swallowed Temba's footsteps as he stepped off the path and into the shadows of the trees. The night air was heavy and cool, thick with the smell that had followed him from the village. It clung to him like smoke, mixing with the scent of damp soil and old wood. The crickets, which had been singing when he entered, slowly fell silent. The silence was deep, not empty, but waiting, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Temba tightened his grip on his walking stick. The moonlight barely reached through the tall branches above, but his eyes slowly adjusted. Every tree looked the same, their trunks dark and twisted, their roots rising from the ground like sleeping snakes. The sound of his feet against the leaves seemed too loud, so he began to walk softer, almost on his toes. He told himself he would only go a little farther, just to see where the smell came from. Then he would turn back before the moon disappeared. But every time he thought of stopping, the smell grew stronger, drawing him deeper like an invisible rope pulling him forward. It was not only strange now, it was alive, breathing with the rhythm of the night. Then, faintly, he heard it, a rhythm, slow and steady. It sounded far away, like a drum being beaten softly under the ground. He froze. The sound faded, then returned again. Thump, thump, thump. Temba's heart began to pound. He turned his head, listening carefully. The sound was coming from deeper in the forest. He took a deep breath and followed it. The trees grew closer together as he walked, their branches curling above him like arms. The smell was almost too strong now, a mix of wet earth, smoke, and something sweet that he could not name. The drumbeat grew louder. It wasn't fast or wild, it was slow, calm, almost like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. He stopped once to rest against a tree. The bark felt rough and cold under his hand. The air was so thick that it was hard to breathe. He looked behind him, but the path had disappeared. There was no way to tell where he had come from. He should have been afraid, but strangely, he wasn't. Something about the sound comforted him, like a song he had forgotten but somehow remembered again. When he began walking once more, the ground changed under his feet. The soil was softer, covered in moss. He stepped carefully, watching where he placed his feet. He thought he saw shapes moving among the trees, shadows that slid across the trunks, gone before he could look twice. He told himself it was just the moonlight playing tricks on him. The drumming grew clearer. It no longer sounded distant. It was here, close. He could almost feel the vibration under his feet. Then the trees opened suddenly, and he found himself standing in a small clearing. The moonlight spilled down through the branches, lighting up the ground in a pale glow. In the center of the clearing was a mound of earth, covered in vines and roots. It was round, shaped like a small hill. The smell was strongest there, rising from the ground as if the earth itself was breathing it out. Temba stood still, staring at the mound. The drumbeat had stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that it made his ears ring. The air was cold now. Even the leaves on the trees seemed frozen in place. He took a slow step forward, then another. Each step sounded loud in the quiet. When he reached the mound, he crouched down and touched the soil. It was warm. He frowned, rubbed it between his fingers, soft, damp, full of life. He looked closer and saw that the vines covering the mound were old, their leaves thin and dry, but beneath them, something hard pressed against the surface. He began to brush the vines aside. They broke easily, dry as paper. A small patch of wood appeared under his hand. He brushed away more, working slowly, careful not to break what was hidden beneath. The smell grew even stronger, filling his nose, his lungs, his mind. The wood was carved, smooth in some places, rough in others. The carvings were faint, lines that formed circles and symbols he could not understand. The moonlight touched it, making the designs glisten faintly. His heart beat faster. He cleared away more vines until the full shape appeared. It was a drum, small, round, and old. Its surface was cracked, but it still held its shape. It looked like it had been waiting there for a long time, asleep under the soil. Temba knelt in front of it, staring. His hands trembled slightly. He thought of his grandmother's words, "Do not follow that smell. It comes from the place where the drums once cried." He swallowed hard. The air felt heavier now, pressing against him. The forest around him was silent, as if listening. He reached out a hand, then pulled it back. His fingers hovered in the air above the drum. The smell was so strong now that it made his eyes water. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint mist rising from the drum's surface, thin, white, almost like smoke. He blinked, and it was gone. He hesitated, his heart pounding. A voice in his head told him to stop, to turn around, to go home before the moon disappeared behind the clouds. But another voice, quieter and stronger, told him to touch it, to know, to finish what had begun when he first smelled the strange scent that morning. He took a deep breath, his hand still trembling, and lowered it slowly toward the drum. His fingers brushed the wood. It was warm, not the warmth of sunlight, but the warmth of life. A shiver ran through his body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, deep beneath the surface of the earth, he felt something move, a soft vibration, as if the ground had sighed. The smell changed. It was no longer heavy or strange. It turned sweet and sharp, like fresh rain on dry soil, like smoke from herbs burned in prayer. The air hummed around him. The vines shivered though there was no wind. Temba tried to pull his hand back, but his palm felt stuck to the drum. The carvings beneath his skin seemed to glow faintly, their lines shining like fireflies. The rhythm returned, faint at first, then stronger. Thump, thump, thump. But this time, it was not coming from the trees or the ground. It was coming from inside the drum. From inside him. He gasped and stumbled back, his hand free at last. The drum stayed still, silent again. The glow faded, and the forest grew quiet once more. The smell lingered, soft now, almost gentle. The moment Temba's hand met the drum, the forest stirred. The air, which had been heavy and still, moved as if a great breath had been released. The smell that had followed him for days changed at once. It burst into sweetness, filling the clearing like smoke from sacred herbs. It smelled of life, of rain on dry soil, of wood burning gently in the night. The trees seemed to sigh, and the leaves above rustled though there was no wind. Temba's fingers trembled against the drum's surface. It was warm, almost alive. The carvings glowed faintly beneath his palm, their lines shining like faint fire. The warmth spread through his arm, then into his chest, until it felt as though his own heartbeat was joining the drum's hidden rhythm. He tried to pull his hand away, but it was as if the drum was holding him, softly, not to harm, but to keep him close. Then his vision blurred. The forest around him faded. The cold night and the sound of the crickets disappeared. A bright light opened before him, golden and red like the sky before dawn. His breath caught. He was no longer in the clearing. He was standing in a wide open plain under the same moon, but the air there was alive with drums, singing, and the sound of feet moving on the ground. All around him, people were dancing in a circle. Men and women, strong and proud, their skins shining with sweat, their clothes made of woven cloth bright with color. Warriors leaped high into the air, their spears raised, their faces marked with paint. Women clapped and sang in voices that carried like the wind. The rhythm of their drums shook the earth. The sound filled Temba's body until it was part of him. He could feel the beat in his bones. In the center of the circle stood an old man, tall and calm, his back straight despite his years. His eyes shone like firelight. He held a drum, the very same drum that now rested under Temba's hand. The man raised it toward the sky, and the singing grew louder. The smell of herbs and smoke filled the air. Temba could feel it again, that same scent that had haunted him since morning, only now it was warm and good, full of memory and pride. The old man began to speak. His voice was deep, flowing like a river. Temba could not understand every word, but he felt the meaning in his heart. The man spoke of the land, of the river that fed it, of the people who guarded it with their songs. He spoke of the promise between the living and the spirits, of how the drum kept that promise alive. Temba looked around and realized that some of the faces in the circle looked familiar. He saw eyes that looked like his mother's, smiles like his uncle's, and even a young woman who looked so much like his grandmother that his heart ached. These were his ancestors, the people who had come before him, the ones whose names were still spoken in the stories told beside the fire. The old man lifted the drum higher. The people stopped dancing and bowed their heads. The moonlight caught the carvings on the drum, and they shone like rivers of light. The old man looked straight at Temba. His eyes were kind but heavy with meaning. "You have heard the call," he said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere, from the air, the trees, and from inside Temba's own chest. "You have walked where others feared to walk. The smell that led you was not of death, but of remembrance. When the earth breathes its scent, it is calling its children home." Temba wanted to speak, to ask what he must do, but no sound came from his mouth. The old man stepped forward and touched the drum again. The rhythm changed, slower now, deep and calm. Around them, the dancers began to fade into light. The songs grew softer, melting into the wind. The old man placed the drum in Temba's hands. "Guard the memory," he said. "The wind will carry it to you again when your people forget. You must remind them." Then the vision began to blur. The bright plain faded, and the forest returned. The sounds of drums and singing melted into the rustle of leaves. Temba was kneeling again in the clearing, his hand still on the drum. But tears were running down his face. They fell onto the wood, shining like drops of rain. The forest was alive with sound again. The night insects had returned. Somewhere far away, an owl called softly. The smell of herbs and smoke lingered in the air, sweet and calm. The drum no longer glowed, but it felt warm, like it remembered what had just happened. Temba wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. His heart was still racing. He looked at the drum, and he understood. The smell had never been something to fear. It was not the scent of something dying, it was the scent of something waking. The ancestors had called to him through it, guiding him here to remember their story. He touched the drum again, gently this time. "I hear you," he whispered. "I will not forget." The forest seemed to answer with a soft sigh. A breeze moved through the leaves, carrying the scent away little by little, until it was only a trace in the air. Temba sat there for a long time. The moon had moved higher, and its light touched the clearing in silver. He felt both tired and full of strength, as though something inside him had changed forever. He could still hear the faint echo of the drums in his heart, steady and calm, like the rhythm of life itself. He thought of Mama Lani, of her warning not to follow the smell. He smiled sadly. She had known it was dangerous, but she had also known it was part of him. Maybe she, too, had once heard the call. Maybe that was why she had spoken with such fear, and such understanding. He took one last look at the drum before standing. He wanted to take it with him, but something told him it was not meant to be moved. It belonged to the forest, to the land, to the people who had first carved it. He brushed his fingers lightly across its surface one last time, a silent promise that he would return. As he turned to go, the forest seemed to open for him. The path that had been hidden before was now clear, bathed in moonlight. He began to walk, slowly at first, then faster, as if the forest itself was guiding his steps. The air was cool and light now, the smell faint but still there, no longer haunting but comforting. Every few steps, he glanced back. The mound was still there, quiet and peaceful, the vines lying gently over it again. The drum was hidden once more, sleeping under the earth. When Temba finally reached the edge of the forest, the sky was beginning to pale with the first light of dawn. The village roofs were visible in the distance. Smoke was rising from one of the huts. He stopped and looked back one last time. The wind brushed past his face, soft and warm, carrying the faintest trace of that sweet, ancient scent. Temba smiled through his tears. The smell no longer frightened him. It was part of him now, part of his blood and breath. He whispered into the morning air, "It was never death. It was memory. And far behind him, deep in the forest, a single soft beat echoed once, thump, like a heart greeting its own. Temba felt it in his chest and walked home, carrying the rhythm with him. If only he knew where the smell had come from. He sat there for a long time, breathing hard, his heart racing. He didn't know what had happened, only that something had changed. The forest no longer felt heavy. The silence was no longer frightening. It felt calm, almost peaceful. He looked at the drum again. It seemed smaller now, just a piece of old wood lying in the moonlight. But deep inside, Temba felt that it was watching him. Waiting. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. His legs were shaking, but he managed to steady himself. The path behind him was dark, hidden by shadows. He didn't know how to find his way back, but he felt that he would. The smell, which had led him here, had finally begun to fade. As he turned to leave, the wind stirred the leaves, and for a moment, he thought he heard a soft whisper, a voice low and ancient, carried on the air. It said nothing clear, just a sound like the beginning of a song. Temba looked once more at the mound and the old drum resting quietly beneath the vines. Then he bowed his head slightly, out of respect, and walked back into the trees. The forest swallowed him again, but this time, the silence felt different, not empty, but alive. And as he walked, the last trace of the scent followed him, fading slowly into the night, leaving only a memory behind. If only he knew where the smell had come from. When Temba returned to Nabala, the sky was already pale with morning light. The village was waking slowly, smoke rising from cooking fires, roosters calling from the fences. His feet were covered in dust, and his clothes were damp with dew. The smell of the forest still clung to him, faint but clear, like the last note of a forgotten song. He carried nothing in his hands, but his heart felt full and heavy at the same time. As he stepped into the village square, people began to notice him. The women fetching water stopped talking. The children who had been chasing each other near the well froze and stared. Even the dogs grew quiet. Temba looked tired, but there was something different about him, something calm, as if he had brought a piece of the forest back with him. Mama Lani was the first to move. She came out of her hut, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes wide. "Temba," she whispered, almost afraid to say his name aloud. "You went there." He nodded slowly. "Yes, grandmother." Her lips trembled. "And you came back." "I came back," he said. A few of the elders came closer, leaning on their walking sticks. The oldest of them, Elder Mosi, spoke in a voice rough with age. "What did you find, child? Tell us what the wind showed you." Temba looked around at the faces, some curious, some frightened, some filled with awe. The whole village had gathered now, forming a circle around him. He bent down, opened the small cloth bag he had carried, and drew out the drum. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was small and simple, but it seemed alive. The wood was old and dark, the carvings faint but clear under the light. It gave off a faint warmth, as though it had been sitting in the sun. The strange smell that had haunted the village for days rose again, but softer now, gentler. It no longer carried fear, it carried peace. Temba placed the drum gently on the ground before the elders. "This was buried in the forest," he said quietly. "I followed the smell, and it led me there. The ancestors showed me where it rested. They spoke through it." The elders exchanged glances. Elder Mosi crouched beside the drum and ran his hand over its surface. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "This is the drum of the first chief," he said. "It was lost before my grandfather was born. We thought the forest had swallowed it forever." Another elder, Mama Wina, whispered, "The wind brought it back through him." The crowd began to murmur. Some knelt, others bowed their heads. Mama Lani stepped forward and touched Temba's shoulder, pride and tears mixing on her face. "You have done what no one dared, my son. The ancestors must walk beside you." Elder Mosi raised his hand for silence. "Bring river water," he said. "Bring the cleansing herbs. The drum must be washed before the sun rises." 2 young men ran to the river and returned with a calabash of clear water. A woman brought a bundle of dried herbs, lemongrass, sage, and wild basil. The elders formed a circle around the drum, their movements slow and respectful. Temba watched quietly as they began to work. Elder Mosi dipped a cloth into the water and wiped the drum's surface. Steam rose where the water touched it, as if the drum was breathing. The smell filled the air, first strong and sharp, then soft, fading into the scent of wet earth and fresh air. Mama Wina sprinkled the crushed herbs over it, whispering old words that only the elders knew. As the sun began to rise, a beam of light fell across the square. The elders began to beat the drum softly, one after another. The sound was deep and gentle, echoing through the village like a heartbeat. Every time it sounded, the smell faded a little more, replaced by the warm scent of wood smoke and morning fires. People began to smile. Children who had been hiding came forward, clapping their hands. Women started humming an old song that no one had sung in years, a song of thanks and renewal. The men nodded quietly, tears glimmering in their eyes. Temba felt the sound of the drum in his chest. It matched his heartbeat, slow and calm. He knelt beside it and closed his eyes. The rhythm carried him back for a moment, back to the clearing, back to the circle of dancers in his vision, back to the old man who had spoken of memory and wind. He could almost hear the voice again, soft and wise. Guard the memory. When your people forget, you must remind them. When the drumming stopped, the village fell quiet again. Elder Mosi looked at Temba and said, "You have heard what others could not. From this day, you will be known as the Listener of the Wind." The crowd repeated the name softly, the Listener of the Wind. It rolled through the air like a blessing. Mama Lonnie smiled through her tears. "You were chosen," she said. "I did not see it before, but the spirits called you." Temba bowed his head. "I only followed what I did not understand," he said humbly. "The smell led me. The wind spoke. I only listened." The villagers began to return to their homes, still whispering his new name. The elders carried the drum to the meeting hut, where it would rest again, safe and watched over. Children followed behind, still humming the soft rhythm that had filled the air moments ago. When everyone had gone, Temba and Mama Lani sat together outside their hut. The sun was high now, and the scent of breakfast fires filled the air. The strange smell had finally disappeared. What remained was simple: wood smoke, warm earth, and peace. Mama Lani placed her wrinkled hand over Temba's. "The smell is gone now," she said. Temba nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "But I can still feel it." She smiled. "You will. Some things never leave those who are meant to remember." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the village sounds, children laughing, goats bleating, the steady beat of pestles on grain. Life was normal again, yet everything had changed. The air felt lighter, freer, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath. Later that day, Temba walked to the edge of the fields. The wind moved through the tall grass, making a soft rustling sound. He closed his eyes and let it touch his face. It smelled clean and new, but deep inside it, he thought he caught a trace of something old, faint and familiar, like the memory of a dream. He smiled. The grass swayed around him, whispering secrets he could almost understand. He felt no fear now, only peace. The forest in the distance looked calm, its dark trees standing tall like quiet watchers. Somewhere inside, the drum was resting again, sleeping under the care of the elders. Temba turned back toward the village, his heart light. He knew he would tell the story one day, how the smell had come with the wind, how the ancestors had spoken, and how the drum had woken after years of silence. But for now, he would let the land rest. He would listen to the wind as it carried the echoes of the past. Sometimes, as days passed and seasons changed, people would come to Temba when the wind blew strangely or when they heard a sound they couldn't explain. They would ask him, "What does it mean, listener of the wind?" And Temba would smile, his eyes gentle, and say, "It means the land is remembering again. Listen, and it will tell you what it needs." He became a quiet man, respected by all. He tended to his goats, helped the elders, and taught the children not to fear the forest. But whenever the wind grew strong and carried that faint sweet scent, Temba would pause, close his eyes, and listen. And sometimes, when the evening sun turned the field, then he would laugh gently, for deep down he already knew, it had come from the heart of the land, from the breath of those who had walked before him, and from the memories the wind never forgets. The end.